Normally, I have a waiver wire video that I do on Mondays after the week of fantasy football that just passed. And let me tell you guys, this is more about the waiver wire than the title let on in this video. Over the past several weeks, I've said that it gets harder and harder to find real values on the waiver wire as the season goes on. And this is absolutely true. There's no doubt about it. You saw guys like Devon Achane, Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams go off the waiver wire boards very early in the season. You're not seeing those league-winning potential type of players on the waiver wire at this point unless there's a massive injury. Every week, though, there are more and more injuries, and that's the reality of when we get into this late in the season of fantasy football. Every year it goes like this. So what do? Obviously, if you need a spot start, these players are great. But if you want to get some real value with those types of guys, I'm going to discuss the most underrated and under-discussed. Nobody talks about this trade strategy in fantasy football today. We're going through that trade strategy today. But guys, real quick, giving away more FFN hats today. So what you need to do to qualify to get a free FFN hat is go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and put your comment in the comment section, and you will have a chance to win this free FFN hat. Let's go ahead and dive right into this. So let me first explain the strategy of this trade right here. So this particular trade strategy I have used for years. So if you are in a fantasy football league where you use a free agency annual budget or a FAB as your waiver wire currency, and you don't just do the waiver wire order where the worst team in your league gets the first crack at waiver wires, if you've got free agency annual budget or FAB, this is the trade strategy you need to integrate. So every single year, as I just discussed in the intro, there are players that you can get off the waiver wire who are going to be a couple weeks of greatness and then back to where they were. They go back to reality, right? Players like Curtis Samuel remind me of this. Or even Deonta Foreman coming off a great game on Sunday versus the Raiders remind me of this type of situation. These are players that always have a couple good games during the season and then their value wanes. What you can do in these types of situations is you need to trade these players in exchange for FAB. Now let me explain. So over the years, I've done this trade strategy for years because I'm big on wheeling and dealing. So I'll give you a couple examples of what I've done over the years. Over the years, a couple years ago in 2021, Emmanuel Sanders was with Buffalo. So Buffalo was using him as their slot wide receiver for a while. And this was a result of Isaiah McKenzie going down to injury. For a couple of weeks, Emmanuel Sanders had some good games where he found the end zone and he was getting 8 to 10 targets per game. Emmanuel Sanders' value in fantasy football was a good flex option for a couple weeks. So what I did was I picked him up off the waiver wire for a total of $6 FAB. And what I did over the next couple of weeks is I watched him produce really well on my bench and I did not need him. So what I did was I found another partner in my league who was struggling at the flex position and I gained more FAB than I paid for him right out of the gate. I ended up getting him for $15 FAB instead of the $6 that I paid for. So I essentially came out $9 FAB more profitable than I spent on Emmanuel Sanders. So why does this matter, right? Obviously, like I said earlier, Ryan, you already said that waiver wire guys are not nearly as valuable later in the season. Absolutely true. But another example of this is later that season in 2021, Alexander Mattison and Dalvin Cook were both on the Minnesota Vikings. Dalvin Cook went down late in the season, and Alexander Mattison was very necessary at that time. So what happened, right? Everybody else in the league was not using this strategy. Nobody was trading for FAB. Nobody was getting FAB during the season. They were spending it, and they were not getting any back. I, on the other hand, did that trade with Emmanuel Sanders, and I did several more over that season to where I came out profiting way more and had way more FAB by the end of the season than anybody else. So when it came time to bid on Alexander Mattison, I was able to outbid everybody else on my league by a lot of dollars. And what ended up happening was I ended up winning the league that year because I had Alexander Mattison win me some massive games there at the end. So the ultimate strategy here is trading players who are on the waiver wire for FAB. And essentially, you're paying the FAB to get these types of players, right? So what you want to do is you want to ride the wave that they are currently on for a couple of weeks. Ideally, you want to do it for a couple of weeks, let their value grow so you can get a profit in return in the long run. Because if you can end up with more fab than what you originally started with in return and get a profit off that player, you're in great shape. Now, obviously, you could get guys like I discussed earlier, like Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane. They graduate from trading for fab to having real value in fantasy football. Puka Nacua is a wide receiver too in fantasy football now. You could get him in exchange for an Amon-Ra St. Brown possibly, or maybe even a Devontae Adams right now. That's the reality of some of those guys. Kyron Williams, his value is lowering, but at a time, he was the running back 3 in fantasy football that you could get in exchange for someone like an Austin Eckler who was injured at the time. This is why this stuff is important, because waiver wire is so important right now. With all of the injuries we're seeing, and all the bye weeks we're seeing, and all of the teams who are desperate, sitting at 1-6, 2-5 right now, 3-4 right now, and need direction and need immediate production, this is where we can take advantage of these types of players right now in fantasy football. So if you use the Sleeper app to play fantasy football, you can do this very easily. You could trade players for fab straight up. It's very easy. You could do it in a heartbeat. Yahoo leagues, you could do the same thing. You could trade for fab. ESPN leagues, it's a little bit trickier. You have to talk to your commissioner of your league. It gets a little bit tricky. But if you're in a situation where you're in a league and you can trade fab and you could trade players for fab, this is something you need to integrate, because as I just noted to you, I won a league doing this a couple years ago. This is all about making sure that you're getting profit off of every trade that you do. And this is why I'm such a big proponent for trading for fab, because when it matters, you can end up getting a guy who will help you win your league late in the season when it really counts. So let's look at some guys on the waiver wire right now this particular week. And guys, I think that you could get some serious value for and some serious fab bucks to help you out later in the season. First guy I'm looking at is Rashee Rice, Kansas City Chiefs rookie wide receiver. He's just under 50% rostered, 46.7% rostered right now. So here's my long-term outlook on Rashee Rice. I believe that Rashee Rice, when you look at the numbers on the screen, those numbers don't tell the full story. He's getting more consistent volume week to week. And he's actually finding the end zone now. And the reason is because he's actually becoming their main target as a wide receiver. And it's becoming very, very evident every single week as the weeks go on. Rashee Rice, I do believe, actually has some legitimate value moving forward. And the best part is you can get him off the waiver wire right now. Now, you're going to have to pay up. The reason you're going to have to pay up is because he has more value than just fab at this point. You can get Rashee Rice in exchange for possibly a Jackson Smith-Njigba, depending on who prefers who, right? So you can get some real players here for Rashee Rice. You're going to have to end up paying at least 16 bucks fab to make sure you secure Rashee Rice in most of your leagues. That's the move I would make. But I do think that Rashee Rice has more value that will profit you in the end if you pick him up off the waiver wire now. Josh Downs, same thing. I called him a fool's gold waiver wire pickup a couple weeks ago. I was dead wrong. I was wrong on this guy. He had a great week in week 7 fantasy football, and I think he's here to stay. This guy sees consistent target share, as you can see on the screen. He's getting right around 6 to 7 targets per game at this point. With Gardner Minshew, it's working. And it's working, and it's going to continue to work. He's 35% rostered just about. So you can make this move. Pick Josh Downs up for, again, it's probably the same price as Rashee Rice, because much like Rashee Rice, Josh Downs is graduating into player value rather than just fab value. And of course, player value is more valuable than fab value as far as trading goes in fantasy football. So Josh Downs, to secure him, you're going to need to put in probably a $16 to $17 bid. But he has real upside that you can either hold on to if you're in a full PPR league, or you could trade away to get some real players like a Jackson Smith-Njigba, as I mentioned earlier. Rashid Shaheed, New Orleans Saints, 18.5% rostered, top 30 wide receiver in fantasy football right now. You can see the numbers on the screen. The dude is a big play guy for the New Orleans Saints. He's really their only true deep threat at this moment. The guy's got serious upside and serious value. That's another guy I think is in the class of Rashee Rice, in the class of Josh Downs, where you can get some serious return in favor for Rashid Shaheed. That's the move you want to make on these guys. D'Onta Foreman, great guy to use right now, because much like I did with Emmanuel Sanders 2 years ago that I told you guys about, D'Onta Foreman is coming off an extraordinary game. 3-touchdown hat trick against the Las Vegas Raiders. 42% rostered, under 50% rostered. He's available in a lot of leagues in fantasy football. D'Onta Foreman's upside, though, the clock is ticking. This is the perfect time to make a value off of him. Get him on the waiver wire for about 20 bucks. That's probably what you're going to have to pay for him. Wait for him to have another good week next week without Khalil Herbert, possibly without Roschon Johnson, and sell the guy for a major profit. That's the move you want to make. Darrell Henderson, same exact thing. Los Angeles Rams, 6% rostered, but he came off an 18-carry week where he got in the end zone versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The guy's clock is ticking. And again, guys, this may not sound like much. It may not sound like you're getting much value here. But the reality is, if you could come out net positive on a waiver wire addition that you made, that's the move you need to make. This is how you get ahead with fantasy football trades, and it's something that nobody talks about. Trading for fab in exchange for players that you got on the waiver wire to gain a profit, so you can use the profit that you made later on in the season when it counts. And those are the types of guys I'm looking at on the waiver wire for this particular week, heading into week 8 fantasy football. So let me know what you think of the trade strategy in the comments below, and what questions you need answered before week 8 fantasy football. And if you want to see some buy low trade targets before week 8 fantasy football, click on this video right here.